For Unit 2 of this project, I am going to submit my outline and my works cited. This is fun. You know, as much of a visual learner as I am, I love organization. I can remember times when I just sat down at the typewriter and just started typing, hoping that something would make sense. And I thought it would. And then I'd get it back and it didn't make any sense at all. And that's when I discovered that outlining is my absolute friend. It makes the writing process so delightful. So let's take a look at what I've done so far. In week 1, I read The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. And it's not easy. There's a lot of dialogue in this that is written exactly as people speak, which I love, but it's very challenging. So in order to understand, and go ahead and read my text, before I even read the text, I like to go to a study guide so that I know what I'm doing and I won't get overwhelmed by the language. I like Lit Charts better than I do SparkNotes because SparkNotes is sort of geared towards, I don't know, it doesn't really speak to me, but I like Lit Charts. It's a little bit more in my wheelhouse. But there are all kinds of different study guides. Pick the one you like. And as soon as you open that study guide, remember that as soon as I open it and I look at it, I need to make sure that I have cited it. I'll show you that in just a moment. So I have looked through the synopsis of the story, step by step through the chapters. So when I open that summary, I see a quick summary. I move on and I read what the chapter is about. You see how short that is? Now when I go over to the text, which I do by clicking Read Now, I'm not overwhelmed by the content. Look, isn't this fun? Love this story. So when I get to chapter 1, I've already read the summary, so it's not overwhelming, and I know what's happening. So when I look at it, I'm going to actually read this. Now the other titles in the collection, I'm going to research and review through study guides, but this one I'm going to read, and this is one of my favorites. So it's all written very conversationally, as you can see, and so that's why using that study guide was really helpful. Now, as I mentioned, I read this entire novel, and I am also using The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. I'm not going to be reading that, but I need to know about it. So I'm going to go to that study guide, and let's see how I make sure I cite that. Here's the study guide for The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. I'm going to read the summary so that I know what's going on. I'm going to read the chapter summaries so that I know what's happening and I know how to make my comparisons and my observations about the nature of the friendship between Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn and Jim. So I need to do this. I need to go right here, copy this. I've already created my project in EasyBib by going to my citations and creating a citation list for my working title. And I'm going to create a citation for that study guide because if I opened it and I looked at it, I'm going to make sure it is cited. So I'm going to let it think. It's found it. It's going to add it to my citations. I'm going to go over here, edit the citation. Make sure that everything is written correctly. This should be capitalized. I want to make sure that you'll never see my name on a plagiarism list because I make sure every single thing gets cited. Now I have that as a study guide. There's really no author because it is a collection of writers. I'm going to display that URL proudly, and I'm going to update the citation. And there it is. Okay? So I wanted to show you one other thing on this while we're here, and that is that if I opened it, even if I couldn't access the complete article, such as this one, this is a New York Times article, and when I got over there to it, there was a little blurb from the article, but you have to pay to see the whole article. I didn't pay to see the article, but I made sure to add it to my citation list because I just don't ever want it to ever come back on me. Now let's go back to that outline. Remember, both on the overview page and the actual submission of the assignment page, I have the template to copy and paste. So I'm going to simply copy this, paste it into a Word document, and fill in the blanks. I say simply, even though there's really nothing simple about it, but it is fun and it does organize my thoughts, so I'm not just all over the place. Now, I want you to learn how to write a formal essay that does not start with some boring fact about when the book was published. Nobody cares. I'm going to say it later on in the introduction, but as the very first sentence that I want to attract my reader to what I have to say, I'm going to write a first-person statement about why I am interested in this collection. I know some people teach it different. This is the way I teach it. It's served me very well, and I hope it will you too. Because starting a paper out with, Mark Twain first published The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, it's just completely boring. Now, some people call this sentence a hook. I don't like that word. It doesn't ever work for me. I'm not trying to hook my reader into anything. I'm trying to attract them to being interested in what I'm interested in by making a personal statement. Okay, now I'm going to separate the sentences. The introduction is just one paragraph. So I'm going to, this may be 2 sentences. This may be 2 sentences. This is 1 sentence, the thesis statement. I'll show you that when we get to the final thing. But this is going to show me the thesis statement includes the facts about the subject matter, the broad themes, and the narrow focused theme. So the broad theme of this trilogy, 3 books, is friendship. Big, broad theme. The narrow theme, in my opinion, is a friend in need is a friend indeed. Because all 3 of these characters are in need of companionship, understanding, and loyalty. That's what they need. And that's what Mark Twain gives them in these 3 novels. Okay, now I have written a little note to myself. I highlight things to myself because I have a, so I know that when I get to the rough draft of writing the actual essay, that this thesis statement is going to get reworked. I've written thesis statements and had to rework them several times in the past, and I'm fine with that. But for my purposes, for this assignment, I need to get the outline organized. Next, the next section of your essay, which may be multiple paragraphs and will be multiple paragraphs, is the definition section. I want you to imagine that the reader knows how to read and has heard, perhaps, of these titles. But this is your section of the essay to tell the reader about the subject matter you have selected. And we break that down into parts for this definition section. Section indicates more than 1 paragraph. First, who is this author? Who wrote this story and why did they write it? Remember, we've had that as a theme in this course. Why did they feel like they needed to write this? And so that's this section. The next section, I know who wrote it. Now I'm going to describe what they wrote. and I'm going to use an overview. If I use quotes from one of those study guides or quotes from the author himself, I'm going to make sure that I quote those sources and that I show where I found the sources so that I am not plagiarizing anything. Next, I'm going to look at the overall themes, and I'm going to use the author's own words or whatever you want to do. This is the section, maybe 1 or 2 paragraphs, about the context. So when you read your series of books, what's the world of the story? In Harry Potter novels, what is the world of the story? Where are we? Where does this take place? That is known as context. It's also known as motif. Where does this story take place? So that's this section in the definition area, right? You can see that. You're going to define who wrote it, what did they write, what's it about, and then we're going to narrow down into what's the context of this. And then we're going to move on to the broad themes. In my case, I'm looking at friendship and loyalty. Now, whatever broad themes you're going to be dealing with is what you're going to be dealing with. Maybe it's family. Maybe the theme that you're looking at is blood is thicker than water. Maybe family members are in dispute and then they come back together again. I don't know. But you're going to look at the broad themes, which you can find in those study guides. And the study guides are great at showing you broad themes. And that's what this section is going to be. And this is probably going to be 2 paragraphs or so. And I noted down some things as I was going. I wanted to just make notes to myself. But the important thing for our purposes is that I see your thinking and your main items. So this is broad themes. 1 broad theme, 2 broad themes, 3 broad themes, right? You'll be able to find them, I promise. Next is my personal connection to the narrowed themes. And this is the important part of an argument essay, y'all. This is not just a research paper. This is not a book report. This is where you relate yourself to what you have read. And that all goes back, this entire section, which may be 1 or 2 paragraphs. It's not that long, but it does relate you. You put yourself in this story. What have you learned in your life that these same characters learn? And this section takes us right back up to that very first sentence. See how nice that is? Okay, so this little section, 1 or 2 paragraphs about your personal connection. Include anecdotes from your own life. For example, one time I, and, show an example that you're comfortable with that illustrates how you relate to those characters. And then we're through. It's time for the conclusion, which is the hardest part of the essay to write. And I find that when I have the conclusion completely organized, which is 1 paragraph, when I have it completely organized, it's very easy to write. Now, I don't like this final quote. I put it in there. I'm going to find something better. But that's what I need for this part of the essay. The conclusion in 8 sentences. Now that is the outline, and the next video will show you how to complete the work cited.